to reinforce the horse. Today we are here with Lidia Kuleshnyk, and as a Renaissance woman, Lidia loves her role as a high-performance coach, healer, and horse advocate. Lidia is the founder of AponaHealing.com. Lidia, aka Lady Apona, brings together 30 years of passion, expertise, and wisdom in pathways for every stage of personal development to help you live a centered, connected, and conscious life. Through her own incredible journey starting at the age of 10, Lidia developed a deep relationship with horses, animals, and nature.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Lidia, for joining us today. That was a short introduction. How about you just go ahead and expand on that and let us know what brought you to reinforce the horse today.
Well, thank you. It's such an honor and pleasure to be on your incredible show. And I've always had a deep spiritual relationship with nature and animals. And as mentioned in the bio, it started when I was very young, at the age of 10, when I was healing from chronic illnesses that I was born with. And at the age of 10, I read The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale and decided that I didn't want to lead a life of chronic pain and illness and degeneration. So it was then that animal spirits came to me in dreams and started to guide me. And I've cultivated that relationship with them ever since. And then in my late 20s, I went through a deep healing. I call it my cocoon of healing, where I had to finally resolve my chronic illnesses. And then it was during that time, which in astrology is actually called your Saturn return, but I wasn't aware that there was a name for that time period in people's lives. And I had very profound dreams of these white pillars of light that would transform into horses. And they started to guide me on my path. So I was an international environmental policy analyst and a mental health therapist. And then I was guided to go into the healing arts at that time. So it was a big life change. And that's how I cultivated, as I was saying, my relationship with horses as healers, with the spiritual essence of horses. And then it was a few years later that my first rescue horse came to me in dreams. And that's what I talk about in my chapter, The Divinity of Horses, in the new book by Katie Carey of Soulful Valley Publishing, Evolving on Purpose, Co-Creating with the Divine. So I share my experiences with, as I was saying, horses in the spiritual realm. And then they started to come to me on earth. And now I have a ranch, Apona Healing Ranch, where we do equine healing retreats and equine-assisted therapy and provide forever home for unwanted horses.
That is beautiful.
Yeah, that's amazing. So the synchronicities of you just connecting out, I think it was your virtual assistant reached out to us originally to connect. And it seems to me that as Alyssa and I have opened up our hearts in the way of spirituality toward the horses and about the horses, it's opening up the pathways to connect with people like yourself. And to be real and honest, say probably half a decade ago, I would not have even entertained a discussion like this. And that's part of my own journey. But to get back to your journey, you mentioned so much in just that brief synopsis. Can you go into more detail about what chronic illnesses you were experiencing?
Sure. Yeah, I was born with deformed organs, so I was a tough case to help medically. I tried to go the medical route, and doctors did their best. But because I couldn't have an easy diagnosis or a regular diagnosis, it gave me the opportunity to create a really strong relationship with myself. So I had to rely on myself. And then when there was no hope and no solutions, that is when the support came in through dreams and through the spiritual aspect. And so connecting with the divine and spiritual messages have been fundamental and instrumental to not only my survival, but my personal growth and healing and evolution, and then expanding my world to include, for example, creating my horse rescue ranch. And then the beautiful thing about connecting with the divine is that you can go forward at your own pace, what's comfortable for you, but you keep expanding who you are. You keep expanding consciousness. You keep expanding possibilities, so that ultimately there is a limitless life ahead of you. You can really achieve your full potential. So I always say, well, it's true that we're all highly evolved spiritual beings. And then we decide how we want to play out this lifetime on earth and what we want to learn. But when we connect with the spiritual aspect of life, then there's no limitation of the mind. I call it moving beyond mindset. So mindset principles, like, for example, in the power of positive thinking, are very important foundational pillars to manifest your life and what you want. But then we can expand from there and be in a flow, what I call a flow state with spirit. And then you always feel supported. It's really a very beautiful way to live. And horses have such a strong spiritual presence, like they haven't disconnected from that at all. So when we're with the horses, they help us activate our own essence, our own spirit, and then strengthen that so that we can use that intuition and that inner knowing to guide us.
That resonates with me on so many levels. Like, yes. Well, to piggyback off of that, you mentioned earlier how your first rescue horse came to you in a dream. How did that unfold as far as it relates to the beginning of your spiritual journey as well?
Yeah, well, that was in my cocoon of healing in my late 20s, and I had phenomenal dreams, and I didn't try. I've never tried. It's just something I fall asleep. And some of these dreams are more real, like the experience is more real than the material world. Like it's they're so powerful and clear, you can't ignore them. I mean, it's just impossible. So one dream, I fell asleep and my spirit was going through a herd of wild horses. And there was like an echoing message saying, you are a sister of horses. And I had a couple of dreams like that. But, at the time, I was so focused on my own healing and survival that I wasn't thinking about horses. I love all animals, but I wasn't thinking, oh, I'd love to have horses, or I wish I could be with horses. And so I just wrote the dream down. And then, had to do my dishes and go about my day and everything. And I was actually healing at the time. So I was very immersed in cooking and energy healing. And then over time, as I became ready to meet this horse Trigger, then I was guided to a trail ranch. And where he had just arrived. I didn't know he had just arrived at that trail ranch. I found that later. And I met Trigger. So in the chapter, The Divinity of Horses, in the book that I mentioned, I share a little brief overview of how Trigger came to me then. In the next set of dreams, Trigger came to me like really determined for me to take him away from that ranch. And I didn't know until very later on that after the summer trail rides, they were planning on sending him to slaughter. And so he knew, he was so evolved, he knew before I was even made aware of it, but he knew the intention of the owners of the ranch, and he wanted to get away. So that's how we connected, through his SOS. He sent out an SOS to the universe, and I was a clear receiver from my own healing. I had cleansed my body, and so I could receive that information. And so I picked up his message, and then we started to work together so that we could get him to a safe place, which was our family farm at the time, but we didn't have anything set up. We had barn and, an old pasture and barnyard, but it didn't have anything set up. And I was totally broke because I was healing. But the universe sent me out of the blue a line of credit from the bank, and I used that line of credit. Not that I suggest people go into debt, but I used that line of credit to get ready for Trigger to come home. So that's a little bit about my journey with dreams. That started them telling me specifically that I was a sister of horses, which didn't really mean anything to me at the time. And then it started to manifest years later when I was ready through Trigger, specifically, communicating with me. It like, again, you can't ignore that because it's so powerful. And then I brought Trigger home, and he healed, and lived happily ever after.
The name Trigger, did you name him, or was he already named that? Or I feel like there might be some significance around that name in one way or another.
Yes, it's interesting that you mentioned that. His name was already Trigger, and they had, I don't know if it was the owner of the ranch or somebody, or he came with that name after, is it Will Rogers' horse was named Trigger? A famous horse named Trigger from a famous actor. And he loved his horse. So he was actually named after that famous horse. But it is symbolic because Trigger is, triggered my whole life to change. And he's now the logo. Trigger is my logo for my Apona Healing brand. So he's always shining his light on the world to help all of us.
Very cool. What a great story. You mentioned getting into the flow state. I've become a lot more aware of that state recently, just in my own life. And also, I've come up with a lot of references that point to like the U.S. Navy SEALs and the teams and the way they actually train and getting into the flow state or collective consciousness, if you call it that way, and like where the SEALs actually cannot perform. And that's part of like their rigorous training, is to form this team that are actually able to individually connect in with the collective consciousness of the team. Can you tell us more about that? Because I feel like you have a pretty good inclination toward that sort of stuff and can shed some light on it for us.
Yeah, sure. Well, I didn't even know that the word flow state was a term that was used in personal development until a few years ago. But I always, without knowing, I always lived in the flow state. And it was always easier for me, as an example, to keep doing what I was doing in a flow rather than, do bite-sized things of activity. So when I was a personal macrobiotic cook, I used to say it was easier for me to cook for somebody all day and then come home and keep cooking. And I could never really figure that out because you think, you'd be tired. But you get energized in a flow state. So in a flow state, you're not using your intellect anymore. You're not using your intention anymore. You may use that to start, like mindset is a powerful fundamental foundation to evolve to flow state. You're literally connecting with the infinite energy of the universe, which is why you're talking about with the Navy SEALs and the collective consciousness, because ultimately we're all one energy field, right? There's no separation. So that the old paradigm that we're releasing now after 13,500 years more or less is releasing the extreme, dependence and extreme need for intellectual control, to assume that the intellect is superior to anything else. But we're mental, so intellectual, emotional, physical, and spiritual beings. So when you're in flow state, just generally speaking, you're doing because you've already accomplished a certain level of mastery in something, or you're already familiar with what you're doing, and then you can really achieve high efficiency and productivity, or high performance, or I call it high performance wellness, because the high performance wellness is not draining. You're not getting drained ever in a flow state. You're creating more energy, you're creating more space, you're creating more time as you are doing your activities. So a lot of people do it already. So the clients I work with who are high performers and CEOs, they already do it naturally, but we just never had a name for it. And there is an institute, I think it's called the Flow Institute, and they have a whole framework now about the 4 states of the flow state. There's like the challenge, and then there's the peak or whatever, and I don't remember what they are, but anyone who's interested in learning about that, they have really great information that they keep developing on the states of the flow state. But I don't work with that. I work with more universal energy. So I always give the example that many years ago, scientists determined that there were 100 billion stars, like our sun, in our Milky Way galaxy, and 100 billion galaxies in our universe. And I think now they say there's 4 times that amount that they can scientifically measure. And then there's universes expanding and contracting around us in the multiverse. So at minimal, every person on the planet has access to 100 billion times 100 billion sources of energy. And all we need to do is cleanse our body, strengthen our body, and align with that energy. And then we can create more energy and live in this beautiful flow where we create inner ease in the activities that we do, even if it's challenging. So like with the Navy SEALs, like even if there's something really serious going on, we don't absorb it. Our aura, our energy field discerns and deflects it so that we stay centered, connected, and conscious. And in essence, you're untouchable. You're the Buddha in the middle of the burning inferno. So all of this is part of flow state, or what I call Taoist non-attachment. And that's really what helped me, without trying, connect with the spirit of horses and with the dreams, because you end up living in that state all the time. And life is so much easier. I always say to people, if they could only understand how much easier life is, the healthier, and the more balanced you are. So that's a little bit about my experience with the flow state.
It's great.
There's so much there's a ton to think about there, and a fair amount of questions that I have, but I'm not sure where exactly to start.
Well, I wanted to piggyback on that a bit. Are you familiar with transcendental meditation, or TM?
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. So I just recently was trained on that. So they give this analogy of an ocean. At the top of the ocean line, there's waves, and sometimes if a storm's coming through, there can be waves, multi-stories high. If we sink down below, say we drop into a submarine and go deep, deep, deep down to the ocean floor, miles deep perhaps, at the floor of the ocean, it's calm, it's serene. Having scuba dived before, even down to just, 40, 45 feet in the ocean, you can see that, and you can look up and you can see, as you're descending, you can see all of the chaos or the waves going on at the surface. But as you descend, it just gets this sort of peaceful calm. So they use that analogy in TM. They teach a really profoundly simple technique on how to essentially just allow your brain to disconnect from that overthinking analytical mind. So do you have any practices like that, or that you've come to find that have been beneficial to you and sort of tapping into this? Because in that analogy, the the ocean floor then is essentially the unified field that connects everybody and everything. And it seems like what you're saying is that the vast majority of people, human existence, we're basically living on that surface without the ability to find peace and calm down below. What I'm hearing you say is that the horses are basically like carrying us, potentially carry us into that calm state. Am I getting that right?
Yes. Well, I'm sure you're familiar with the Heart Math Institute study from years ago, where they measured the electromagnetic field of the horse's heart, and it's 5 times larger. And then they measured the physiological response of humans who were just standing beside a horse. And of course, they had, indications of lower blood pressure and decreased stress response. So absolutely, horses, I consider them to be pillars of light from my spiritual experiences with them. And then in the material world, I've been working with horses for over 20 years, almost 25 years. But in terms of my own personal practices, I totally support any type of meditation or guided exercises, but I didn't come to the flow state through that. I came to the flow state through, it's a similar, different pathways, right, to achieve the frequency within our core that we sort of need, you might say, to experience what you were just talking about. And so the different pathways, one can be TM. I mean, there's all sorts of, some people chant, all the different spiritual traditions. And I came to it through Reiki, energy healing, and macrobiotic healing food in my cocoon of healing. In macrobiotics, food is seen as frequency and nutrition. So our teacher, Michio Kushi, said it was at the time about 200 years ahead of its time in its understanding of food as frequency or energy. So not calories, but, as how your frequency is affected by the food that you eat. And so this is why macrobiotics has been so well known over the years for healing very serious health conditions, because you're working with principles, which I now offer as 12 ancient universal principles of non-attachment for the flow state. But you're working with principles that are universal, and then they're applied to food. So that was my pathway to that. Intensive Reiki sessions, 2 hours a day, sometimes twice a day, and then really intensive medicinal macrobiotic cooking. And then as a byproduct of that, then I went into those states without, when I fell asleep or, when in my daily life, but I didn't know that I had shifted in that way. But that was why I was really able to receive those messages. So there are many different pathways to getting into that, what I call centered in your core energy, connected to your essence, your power, and being conscious of who you are, where you're at, of your beliefs, your values, and conscious of your growth. So being centered, connected, and conscious is that state that is a state of evolution, personal evolution, into the deepest aspect of self. And then the external becomes easier. It's easier to manage energy and stress. It's easier to know within yourself that there's a solution to every problem when you always feel that connection within. And that was one of the gifts that I came out of my deep healing with. I just wanted to get better so I could go back to my jobs and my career in environmental policy. But that connection to myself felt so amazing that there's nothing in my life that could now ever compromise that. It's a phenomenal feeling to be that deeply connected with the most inner state of your being. So, for example, I've been doing Reiki for over 30 years. I did it sort of as a hobby and then professionally So I can just go into that state, that empty mind, empty vessel state, without preparing, without meditating. I can just show up for a client on Zoom or a client who comes for a retreat here, because I've been living it for so long, right? It's very easy for me to shift from, let's say, doing administrative work, right? Or taking the garbage out, right? And then the next second, I'm present. Like I am an empty vessel for that energy. So that's a little bit about my journey and the tools that
I love that. I absolutely love that. And your mention of pathways is very important and profound, and it's worth mentioning again and bringing up, because a lot of us, it seems, we know that there are multiple paths available, but we get so constricted in or tunnel vision with our own belief system or what we believe to be the correct pathway. But we forget and miss that we're all, in our essence, we're conscious spiritual beings. So the one peak, many paths analogy that I like to think about, the more I've kind of unpacked that in my own life, what you're talking about, macrobiotic and all that kind of stuff. And there's just all around the world, there's different ways of expressing it. Like
we only know our own way. And there are ways there for us because we're here. So that's what I love about coaching. So I shared my personal experience of how I healed my chronic illnesses with Reiki and macrobiotics and soft reflection, and then how that shifted my frequency. And then I created my Apona Healing Method for clients who are interested in either healing chronic illness or in their own personal development. But from that, I have always done coaching and counseling, and because of my background as a therapist in psychology. And this is what I love about coaching, is that you don't have to be interested in Reiki or macrobiotics. You can do your own path, and I can support clients in finding their pathway, because I don't know what's best for you. Only you know what you're meant to be here to learn and what you want to align with to get to the top of that mountain, or what we're saying, that deep inner state of being and feeling the oneness. And so that's what I love about the freedom of supporting people through either holistic coaching, which evolved into my high performance wellness coaching, is we can have guidelines, but ultimately you're your own master. And then the ultimate is to have insight, right? For you to have your own insight, to ignite insight, expand awareness, and then align yourself in body, mind, and spirit with your vision. And this is the beauty of high performance wellness coaching, and that you can bring in tools, like you were talking techniques, with the Navy SEALs, or as example, how I healed myself. But ultimately it's up to you. And I love that. I love seeing clients find their own way, because then they're completely empowered. Then they really know themselves, right? And that's so joyful to see others step into that in their own time and in their own way, and not necessarily being told how to do it. We're just here as trusted advisors, right? As guides.
Yeah, I love that.
Can you tell us more about your Apona healing, and primarily where it got its name and what it is to you?
Well, yes, it's a derivative from the horse goddess, Apona, with an E. And many years ago, when I was looking for a name for my healing arts practice, it came to me through the horses, actually. They came to me in dreams with an A, Apona. So I was Apona Healing Arts. And then in my 30 years of doing all these things, horses and retreats and helping clients heal their chronic illnesses, and then coaching, then I created my brand, Apona Healing, to identify those 4 pathways. So there's the high performance wellness coaching, where we work on flow state, mindset, consciousness, and I have 12 ancient universal principles that clients can work with. And then I have my Apona Healing Method, where we work with Reiki and healing foods and coaching for deeper healing in some aspect. And then we have our Equine Healing Retreats at the ranch. And then we have retreats without horses as well. And I have a signature coaching program for that called Hidden Buddha, The Journey of Self-Discovery, where we look at core beliefs and values. Are we carrying imprints, like you were saying, that aren't ours? What do we need to release? And then how do we really ignite or refine our passion and purpose on the earth? And we also have vacation rentals here as well. So Apona is now the all-encompassing framework for the 4 pathways that I have experience in and that I offer. But as we were saying, there are many pathways. There's as many pathways to living your potential as there are people. And it's the unique combination of things where you create your own perfect pathway.
Can you tell us more about your opinion about mortality? To expand on that a bit, from a healer's perspective, I'm curious, why do you think people die? Why are we not immortal?
Well, we are. I mean, our soul is eternal. We never actually die. Our physical body no longer is alive physically on the earth, but our consciousness is forever. And our consciousness is a manifestation of our soul. And in my deep healing, I had thousands of dreams of out-of-body experiences. Horses were part of that, but I would just fall asleep and have these dreams, right? And I always, sort of joke and say, some people write, a really phenomenal book about an out-of-body experience, or, when they had a life after death experience. But I've had hundreds or thousands of them, and they just became part of my daily life. So we certainly have a limited time on Earth, and that's the whole concept of time. So I say, like, you have a deadline, you get things done. That's kind of human nature. So our lifetime is kind of our deadline. We don't want to get stressed about it, but we have a limited, finite time as a spiritual being in a physical body in this incarnation as you, as me. But then when we leave the body, life continues. And I've experienced that. I died twice in my cocoon of healing. I was so weak, and I went through the tunnel of light, just like in the movies. I went through the tunnel of light. I had the life review. And after I came out of that cocoon of healing, I knew that my life was focused on laying foundations for future generations. And I was very conscious of that. And that allows you, or in my case, it really allowed me to have the essence of Taoist non-attachment or flow state, because I'll just do the best I can. I'm not going to worry too much. I might have concern, and I may have to respond to that concern to prioritize what I need to do. But I know that I'm creating a foundation for others, and I'll do my best, and then my work will be done. And then I can live and flow. And that's part of the deeper consciousness of being in flow state. But in my experience, and I've had out of body experiences where I was just pure consciousness. So no form, I wasn't in like white light or anything. I've had those dreams, but just pure consciousness, and it was phenomenal. It was just phenomenal. So I have no fear or concern about dying, because I'm going to keep evolving after hopefully after I leave my body.
I don't know a lot about near-death experiences and such, but I would say the past 6 months or so have gotten much more deep in kind of exploring those and reading about different stories, and they're all similar. They all have a common thread. I find it fascinating that there's this level of kind of peace that everybody who has experienced something like that has. And it's not like, oh, who cares, the lackadaisical sort of mindset. It's more so tapping in and finding the true essence of what we are, of love and conscious beings. Like, it seems the horses to me are just always tapped into that.
The horses have helped us. I mean, Dad and I connect better, and to say I think the horses are the reason why we're able to connect with people like yourself.
Yeah, reinforce the horse wouldn't exist.
And Dad, I feel like Dad and I would still kind of be living our old, I don't know, rather agitated, probably depressed lives. Just
well, yes, absolutely. Horses are a gift to humanity. I mean, horses, as we all know, I don't need to say it, have supported humans throughout our own growth and development and evolution. Most of our modern conveniences we wouldn't have without horses. They fought in wars with us, agriculture, transportation. I mean, now sports, recreation, now they're playing a pivotal role through equine therapy. And there's many ways, to approach equine therapy. And they are there as wise spiritual masters holding the sacred space in a gentle, powerful way to help humans. Horses are here to love, and horses love humans more than we can imagine. I always say, if humans loved horses the way horses love humans, we would have peace on earth. So when I see a horse now, after my last over 20 years of having spiritual experiences with them, any horse, I don't care what shape they're in or age, where they are, that is a pillar of light on the planet. A wise spiritual soul. They may have trauma. I mean, they may have all the things that they had to experience to come here into the human world. But they are radiating out light, and they are here to help shift the frequency of the planet and to help humans. So in my area where I live in the country, we have a lot of old what's called bank barns, the old pioneer barns that have the fieldstone foundation and the high wooden haylofts that are falling down or are empty, that were built in the 1800s. And it makes me so sad, because I think there could be these horses, these pillars of light, who could have sanctuary there. And I created something, I haven't implemented it yet, but I created something called Equine Land Trusts, kind of like Habitat for Humanity, for humans, that maybe one day I may be able to have the time and and resources to pursue that, where you create kind of like a pioneer type of homesteading for people who love horses, and then have funding to regenerate land and create homes for unwanted horses, and then cultivate our personal development with the horses as stewards. We're stewards, right? Humans are meant to be conscious stewards of the planet and of life. And first and foremost, we have to learn how to be the conscious leaders of ourselves. We have to value ourselves enough to prioritize our own healing and growth and evolution. I mean, we don't have to have something wrong with us. There's nothing wrong with us to get to the next level. We're all perfect the way we are, and where we're at. And I always say it's time to release self-blame and move into the responsibility of self, of nurturing oneself and honoring oneself. And then the horses, as you're saying, are here to help us activate that and to make it feel it's okay to focus on that and find value in that, and value in the spiritual aspect of life. Because from that comes true, lasting, infinite abundance. Because abundance is the essence of the universe. We're releasing that old mindset of lack, right? Of limitation, and we're moving into the new paradigm, that there's abundance for all. It's, and we're evolving, we're changing paradigms. So sure, people will change professions. I did. I've changed professions, and we can embrace horses in a new way. We don't have to work horses to death. And I'm completely against horse slaughter, obviously. I mean, just because we did things, in 1250, I call it medieval mindset, doesn't mean we have to keep doing that. We're evolving out of that, and as you're saying, embracing horses as divine beings, like see a horse and see an angel. And how would we treat an archangel in front of us? With reverence, right? With commitment, with dedication, not an object that is a slave to be bought and sold.
It's interesting you mentioned that, the take on how we treat an angel. I think that comes back around to what you mentioned earlier of going into oneself. Clearly over history, plenty of angelic beings and or avatars, if you will, or even deities, depending on how you believe it, existed on the planet. And what did they ultimately do? For lack of better expressions, they opened fire. I think it follows through that at the core. I mean, the teachings across all belief systems have been basically go inside, find the love that you truly are, and express it. So it's interesting. I think the war on horses that's going on right now, especially in our country. I know you're in Canada. In America, it's like there is a definite war on horses.
I don't know. Have you had any experience with connecting with wild horse herds or existing in wild horse herds?
Yes, well, I have a wild horse that was a BLM horse rounded up by the helicopters in the States. I was guided to her in dreams, and she was on a Facebook post in 2019. And I had just started really going on Facebook at that time. I had an account, but I hadn't really used it. And I was told in dreams there would be another horse coming, and I saw her. And I went through quite a journey, to bring her back. And that's how I really started to learn about the roundups and what's happening to the wild horses in the US and in Canada, in Canada's own way. And as you're saying, the war on horses is very real. There is a holocaust of horses globally. And this is why we're being called now to really speak out and to really share what we're sharing today. This is very serious. And the light of the horses is trying to be extinguished. And we're not going to let that happen. But the horse that came into my world, the wild horse, her name was Spring, and then I was guided to call her Rose. So her name is Spring Rose. And she is a powerful sovereign queen. And her essence is sovereignty. So on my AponaHealingRanch.com website, which I'm going to be integrating into AponaHealing.com when I have time. But I identified the spiritual essence of our horses, and Spring Rose is sovereignty. So she teaches us about honoring ourselves and reclaiming our sovereignty. And she had tremendous trauma, but very spiritually knowing. So the advanced consciousness of horses we have yet to discover. I mean, they feel the trauma and the fear and the physical and emotional pain. It's just like we do, but they also they're also very aware of why they're here and why they're enduring such hardship for the betterment of humanity. I have thought about this a lot. Like, why would a high spiritual being incarnate into this slavery or into these sometimes really horrific conditions? And all I can think of in my present state of consciousness is that they know that their time on Earth is helping humans and the planet by radiating their light. And every person they are interacting with, even if it's those who want to torture and slaughter them, is helping that person in some way. But we want to end that, obviously. I mean, there's enough suffering. We've had enough suffering of humans and horses and animals. This has to end. And, but I'll share a little brief story from Spring Rose. Spring Rose was a type of horse who would stare at you. And so I didn't know this, but she was deemed untrainable and dangerous. And I guess that's why she ended up in a kill lot after years in the BLM holding pens. And so I got her out of a kill lot in Colorado. And that wasn't easy from Canada because the kill lot did not have a phone number that I could use in Canada. But I was on a mission, right, to help Spring Rose. But everybody who helped us along the way in quarantine and in layovers, and some people tried to gentle her, would say she stared at you. So when she arrived at our farm, she had these huge eyes, and she would stare right into your soul, like just stare, even though she couldn't be handled, even though she was afraid and aggressive. And then over time, just through stillness, just through being present with her, sleeping with her, sitting with her, she started to find her way in the human world. It was hard for her to learn this alien world of humans. But my point of the story is maybe 2 or 3 years later, she said to me, my mother, so she said to me when she was a baby, her mother told her there would be the one, I don't know what that meant, the one who would save her, the one who would be her human. And she had been looking for the one ever since she was rounded up. And she said, you are the one. You are my one. And it was so powerful. And she didn't know at first. It took her a while. She'd always look at me like, are you going to be like the others? Are you going to trick me? Are you going to earn my trust and then betray me? And then one day she came and she said, with her eyes, you are the one. So in the midst of the trauma, in the midst of the suffering, she had a knowing of her path, right? Of a higher reason and a higher mission here. And this goes back to Taoist non-attachment, what we're talking about in flow state, because humans, we have forgotten, for the most part, that connection to that knowing of why we're here. So we have the trauma and the pain and the suffering, but then we have forgotten how to integrate that, right, into being able to keep going forward with our knowing of our spiritual reason for being here. But certainly what's happening, I mean, if you look at Australia, they're doing the same thing with the Brumbies, right?
Yep.
It is, and in Canada, I mean, horse slaughter is absolutely horrific. So we support the SAFE Act. I don't know the details of who is the right version of it or whatever, but we don't want American horses shipped to Canada to be tortured and slaughtered. We have our beautiful draft horses that are being sent to Japan in horrific, torturous conditions to be tortured and slaughtered for someone's useless dinner. I mean, we're trying to stop that in Canada. With Jan Arden, who is a phenomenal actress and artist and singer, and she's taken on a leading role as a conscious leader to help us in Canada end this. So yes, it's so important right now. This is why I wrote my chapter, The Divinity of Horses, to help spread the awareness that horses need our help, and they're also here to help us, right?
Yeah, and looking back on history, I mean, you would have to be quite aloof to think that horses haven't already provided so much for humanity, like you were saying earlier. I mean, they've catapulted us into myriad aspects of our physical existence on this planet. And, post-industrialization, we more or less just kind of discarded them, for lack of better terms. So it's sad to think about.
It's also, fascinating to me that they have the ability, and I think all animals do, but for me it's come strongly through the horses. Like, they have the ability to speak. They can speak. And sometimes, having gone through animal communication practices and teachings, it's not always in human words. It's often a feeling. One of our Mustangs, she shared her true name with me, and it was a very profound experience. And since then, it's been like, I feel like us as a herd, and I refer to our herd as our 3 horses, and Dad and I, we've been so much more, collected and connected in so many ways. Like, they're so powerful.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because the name that came to Alyssa one night was Grace. Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that, because after her name, she actually responds to that name. So it's a really interesting thing. But since this is the Reinforce the Horse podcast, can you tell us how you like to reinforce your horse?
Well, just by honoring them through stillness. That's really the fundamental. When I go see the horses, we release agenda, expectation, and I always embrace them and spend at least a few minutes in stillness with them. And they're dealing with a lot of trauma, right, from being in the human world. But then they're also ready. Horses are so ready, as you're saying, to share, right? To share who they are, their essence, to help you remember who you are. And as I was saying, when I started having dreams of horses, I wasn't thinking about horses. The horses knew me better than I knew myself, right? They recognized me and what I was meant to do here long before I had any clue that I was meant to do that. Like, I wasn't an easy candidate to shift my life in my cocoon of healing. I kind of have arguments with my spirit guides. It's like, why do you want me to do that? And I've already done this. And I wasn't like, that's why they had to, come on so strong, right, to keep me moving. But my favorite thing to do with the horses is just breathe. And of course I do Reiki, so I may not do a whole hour session with them, but I may stand and just channel energy with them. And it does take time. It does take time, and they're vulnerable, as we were saying, just like we are. But they're like they have like these giant wings around you, and they celebrate, right, in your connection with them. Like, it's really beautiful. It's like you were saying, they will reveal more of themselves to you when they know you're ready. So they meet you where you're at. And we want to meet them where they're at too, right? Like, so, but they will reveal more. I remember the first time that happened when Trigger and Maggie at the time, many years ago. It was a cold winter night. We had this bank barn, with the Fieldstone Foundation. It was all cozy in there. And I went in and, just spent some time with them and care for them. And then, how horses scratch each other on the back, with their nose. Well, they came around me and they wrapped me around, like, so I was in the center, and they wrapped their 2 bodies around me, and they looked at each other, and I know what they said. They said, she's good. Like we can reveal more to her now. And they were around me, and they were nuzzling me, and they invited me into their deeper spiritual world in that moment. And it was like, wow, I had never experienced that. It was quite emotional.
Yeah. So many humans, I think, would hear stuff like that and just say, well, that's woo woo, or, that's, I had an epiphany just the other day. My phone malfunctioned, and it called 911, and or called the emergency service, right? And So it took us a while to hear the operator on the line come through, and we were outside and like wound up coming in to the house, and I set my phone down on my countertop, and I heard a hello, can you hear me? And I'm like, God, like, but it turned out to be this operator who was on the phone. And what I'm getting at with that is like this whole communication was going on unbeknownst to me. I couldn't see it. I couldn't hear it. I couldn't feel it. It was invisible for some time until one of my senses was able to dial into that and to be open and receiving of that. And I've heard this expressed in different ways, especially like our sight, our visual acuity linked to the small little sliver of the electromagnetic field that we're able to actually quote unquote see from. And it just strikes me as this whole interaction between the humans and horses is that for a number of us were able to just be open. And you're another guest that we've had on the show that is just really talking about stillness, silence, being open, being really in love with what we are as human beings and within ourselves. And then that opens up this pathway, this awareness and understanding with the horse. The reason there's so much animosity between human and horses in a lot of ways, and the reason they're trying to be expelled from the earth by a lot of humans, is perhaps that broken masculinity, that broken aspect of just being so caged up and walled up from ourselves.
If you're disconnected from your soul, you feel insecure, right? So when you feel insecure, then you have to bring in control mechanisms to make yourself continuously feel stable and secure. And then you create belief systems. I always say, the human mind can convince itself of anything, right? The intellect can be great, and it can be our greatest destroyer, which we can see. I mean, if what do I say? If intellectual dominance was intelligence, then our planet, we'd have abundance for all life on the planet, right? So we became an intellectually dominated culture, you might say, because of that disconnect. Because we're all, as we're saying, infinite spiritual beings. And when we disconnect from the infinite feeling of security and strength, and being grounded, and being centered, connected, and conscious, and feeling comfortable with ourselves, then we have fear. Insecurity is a result of disconnection, and then fear is the result of that instability of trying to control the external world to make us feel secure. So then when we go into that control paradigm, then we create stories that we're superior and I'm justified and you are my domain, right? And it is a very deep spiritual and psychological state that is now being released on the planet. Everything stems from feeling insecure, not just physically, not just mentally, but viscerally. Right? Viscerally, like mind, body, spirit, your frequency. If your core energy, obviously your core energy is your personal signature of the infinite universal energy. We're each shining gems in the crown of the universe, right? But if your core energy is constantly being depleted, constantly being, exhausted and leads to disconnect, then your life is a struggle in every way. And we can pretend, like we can put Band-Aids on and we can pretend that we're okay, but how we treat ourselves, and in this case horses, reveals if we're okay or not, right? So that's really the essence. I mean, we can have long conversations about that, but how do we overcome that? Well, it's gotten very extreme, but it was extreme, in 1300 too. I mean, look at how animals were treated then. Right. But the vibration on the planet was lower then. So from a astrophysics point of view, the celestial bodies that were around the Earth at that time were lower light energy. Now it can't be sustained anymore, because without exception, there are certain principles in the order of the universe, and in 2100, the North Star aligns with the North Pole, heralding in the next 13,500 years of light. So the planet goes in 26,000 year cycles. So why is there a war on horses? Or it's more apparent, or we know more about it now, because it's going to end. The darkness is ending. And so the light is winning, and you can think about it as a battle or whatever, but it's an evolution, and it's the last stand, right? It's the last grasp. All darkness comes from insecurity, right? It's a parasitic energy, because it needs to attach to the light, right, to feed itself, right? So we will get through this, and more people know about it. Like, I didn't even know about the roundups. Really, I had heard vaguely about them until Spring Rose came into my life. And the more we're aware, and we're living in a higher vibration on the planet, which supports us. And then with the horses, in this case we're talking about horses, but with other means as well, and other animals, we can reconnect with our soul. We have our spirit and our soul, and then forgive ourselves. I don't wish any harm on anyone on the planet, because they are my spiritual brothers and sisters. We're one energy. I wish for them to live in their true essence. So I wish for that for the kill buyers. The horses, stand with them and hope and pray that they awaken before they're sent to slaughter, right? They send out I just rescued a horse, one of my ascended horses, Woody. He came to me in dreams in January and said a new horse would be joining us. And she was in a kill lot in Mississippi or somewhere down there, and no one was stepping up for her. And she has tremendous trauma. But she also, as we're saying, spiritually tells me things, right? Or as you're saying, it may not be in human words, but she tells me things, because she knew why she was coming here. So in personal development now, they talk about what is your big why. And this is all these different people bringing their gift, right, into the big picture, is helping us reconnect and helping us feel secure. We wouldn't have a need to subjugate, control, dominate, destroy if, as you're saying, if we connected with our light.
Yeah, for sure. It makes so much sense.